Hollywood once lived dangerously. Before the censors tightened their grip in 1934, filmmakers smuggled taboo subjects onto screens that would make today's R-rated films look tame. But what happens when a movie crosses so many lines that entire towns refuse to screen it? These 14 pre-code bombshells didn't just push boundaries, they obliterated them, leaving scandalized audiences and panicking studio bosses in their wake. 1. The Blue Angel, 1930. Before Marlene Dietrich became a Hollywood icon, she scandalized American audiences as Lola Lola, a cabaret performer who destroys a respected professor's life and reputation. Joseph von Sternberg's masterpiece wasn't just provocative, it was revolutionary. The story follows Professor Roth, a dignified academic who becomes obsessed with Dietrich's Lola, eventually giving up everything to follow her into humiliation and madness. What really sparked outrage was Dietrich's brazen performance. Her rendition of Falling in Love Again, while perched on a barrel, legs displayed for all to see, became an instant cultural flashpoint. Women's groups condemned the film as a glorification of vice, while religious organizations launched boycotts in conservative cities across America. Paramount, which distributed the film, found itself defending a German import that conservative newspapers labeled European decadence invading American screens. Theater chains in the Midwest pulled it entirely after community protests, yet critics couldn't deny the film's power, with the New York Times calling it a masterpiece, even while acknowledging its shocking frankness. What ultimately saved The Blue Angel was its artistry. The unforgettable performance by Dietrich and von Sternberg's atmospheric direction elevated it beyond mere scandal. Today, it's considered one of cinema's greatest achievements, but in 1930 it was the film that made America realize just how far the new talking pictures could go. 2. Freaks, 1932. MGM wasn't known for shocking audiences, but Todd Browning's Freaks changed that overnight. The studio expected a hit horror film. What they got was a career-ending scandal and nationwide theater bans. Browning, fresh off directing Dracula, cast real circus performers with physical disabilities to tell a story of betrayal, revenge, and the true meaning of monstrosity. The plot follows a beautiful trapeze artist who marries a sideshow performer for his inheritance, only to be violently punished by the close-knit community of carnival performers. But it was the presentation of real people with disabilities that caused unprecedented backlash. At the film's test screening, one woman reportedly ran from the theater, threatening to sue MGM, claiming the film had caused her to miscarry. Whether true or not, the story spread like wildfire. Cities from Atlanta to Cleveland refused to screen it. The United Kingdom banned it outright for 30 years. MGM panicked, cutting the film from 90 minutes to just over an hour, removing the most disturbing sequences. Studio head Louis B. Mayer reportedly called it the most repulsive thing ever put on film and tried to bury it entirely. Browning, previously one of Hollywood's most successful directors, found his career effectively over. The film lost nearly $200,000, a fortune in Depression-era dollars. Yet today, Freaks is celebrated for its humane portrayal of its subjects and its unflinching examination of who the real monsters are, a film decades ahead of its time that paid the ultimate price for its boldness. 3. The Divorcee, 1930. When Norma Shearer decided to shed her good girl image, she didn't just change her career, she unleashed a national conversation about double standards that nearly got her blacklisted. The Divorcee follows a wife who, upon discovering her husband's affair, declares, "From now on, you're the only man in the world that my door is closed to," before embarking on her own romantic adventures. The film's radical premise, that a woman might respond to infidelity with her own affairs rather than tears, was unprecedented. When Shearer's character drinks, smokes, and clearly enjoys her newfound freedom, moral guardians were apoplectic. The phrase emotional promiscuity appeared in outraged newspaper editorials across America. Women's clubs in Boston and Philadelphia organized boycotts, while church groups demanded MGM pull the film. What truly enraged critics wasn't just the behavior shown, but the fact that Shearer's character faces no dramatic punishment for her actions. In some cities, local censors demanded re-edits to insert scenes suggesting the character's regret. MGM executives worried the controversy would damage Shearer's marketability, but audiences, especially women, responded with record attendance. Shearer won an Academy Award for her performance, proving that moral outrage couldn't stop a film that spoke to the changing reality of American marriage. The studio survived the boycotts, but The Divorcee became a primary exhibit in conservative arguments that Hollywood needed stricter oversight. 4. Taboo, 1931. F.W. Murnau's final film before his tragic death wasn't just a visual masterpiece, it was a direct challenge to America's racial and cultural anxieties. Shot on location in Tahiti, with an entirely indigenous cast, Taboo tells the story of two lovers who defy sacred island traditions with tragic consequences. What made Taboo truly revolutionary was its frank portrayal of Polynesian culture and its sensual, unashamed depiction of the human body. Scenes of islanders swimming and dancing sent moral guardians into a frenzy. The Catholic Legion of Decency condemned it as dangerous exoticism, while community groups labeled it primitive indecency masquerading as ethnography. Theater chains in the South refused to show the film entirely, citing concerns about racial mingling in its romantic storyline. Paramount, which distributed the film, faced organized boycotts in at least 12 cities. Some newspapers wouldn't even print advertisements for the movie, considering the promotional images too revealing. Critics were divided. Some praised its documentary-like authenticity and stunning visual compositions, while others accused Murnau of exploiting his subjects. The film ultimately lost money in America, though it found success in Europe, where audiences were less constrained by puritanical standards. Taboo represents a fascinating moment when artistic ambition collided with America's deep-seated cultural prejudices. Today, it's celebrated as a poetic masterpiece, but in 1931 it was the film that showed just how uncomfortable Americans could be when confronted with cultural differences on screen. 5. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931. Paramount's adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic tale wasn't just another horror film, it was a psycho-intimate descent into mankind's darkest impulses that left censors sweating and audiences gasping. Frederick March won an Oscar for his dual role, but the film's frank exploration of repression and desire nearly got it banned nationwide. Director Ruben Mamoulian didn't just adapt the story, he reinvented it, adding psychological depth and shocking sexual undertones. In this version, Jekyll's transformation into Hyde isn't just about evil, it's explicitly about unleashing repressed desires. Scenes between Hyde and a bar girl named Ivy, played by Miriam Hopkins, contained visual innuendo so bold that several state censorship boards demanded extensive cuts. Religious organizations in the Midwest organized theater boycotts, claiming the film glorified man's baser nature. The transformation sequences, with their grotesque physical contortions, were considered so disturbing that some theaters posted warnings in their lobbies. In Britain, censors demanded so many edits that Paramount briefly considered not releasing it at all. What made the controversy even more intense was the film's unmistakable quality. Critics couldn't deny its artistry even while acknowledging its shocking content. The New York Times called it a remarkable picture, even as community groups condemned it as a feast of depravity. When the production code was enforced in 1934, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde became one of the first films deemed too controversial for re-release, effectively vanishing from American screens for decades. 6. The Story of Temple Drake, 1933. William Faulkner's controversial novel, Sanctuary, was considered so disturbing that Paramount's decision to adapt it wasn't just risky, it was corporate suicide. The story of a privileged Southern woman's harrowing experiences at the hands of criminals pushed the boundaries of what could be shown on screen, even in the anything-goes pre-code era. The film follows Temple Drake, played by Miriam Hopkins, who encounters a gang of bootleggers after a car accident. What happens next was conveyed through shadows and implications, but audiences in 1933 understood exactly what the film was depicting. The notorious corn crib scene became a flashpoint for national outrage. Conservative newspapers launched editorial campaigns demanding the film be pulled from distribution. Women's organizations issued statements condemning Paramount for degrading American womanhood. In several southern states, theater owners who dared to screen the film faced organized boycotts and threats from local officials. The controversy reached such heights that it was specifically mentioned in congressional hearings about Hollywood's moral influence. Paramount executives found themselves defending the film as a cautionary tale about modern youth. But few critics were convinced. The studio eventually pulled it from circulation entirely, making it one of the most suppressed major studio films of the era. The Story of Temple Drake became a prime example used by censorship advocates to argue that Hollywood could not police itself. When the production code was strictly enforced in 1934, this film was held up as Exhibit A of why such regulations were necessary. 7. Blonde Venus, 1932. When Josef von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich teamed up for their fourth collaboration, they didn't just push boundaries, they ignored them completely. Blonde Venus tells the story of Helen, a mother who becomes a nightclub performer and takes a wealthy lover to pay for her husband's medical treatment, challenging every notion of feminine sacrifice and virtue. What really sent moral guardians into a panic was the film's refusal to punish its heroine. Rather than suffering for her transgressions, Helen achieves fame, wealth, and eventually reconciles with her family on her own terms. The infamous Hot Voodoo number, where Dietrich emerges from a gorilla suit to perform in an afro wig, combined racial imagery with sensuality in ways that shocked 1932 audiences. Religious groups across America condemned the film as glorifying adultery. Women's clubs in Boston and Philadelphia organized theater boycotts, claiming it undermined marriage. Local censors in Chicago demanded so many cuts that Paramount briefly considered not releasing it there at all. The Catholic Legion of Decency placed it on their condemned list, urging parishioners to stay away. Yet critics couldn't deny Dietrich's mesmerizing performance or von Sternberg's visual genius. The controversy only fueled public curiosity. Paramount weathered the boycotts, though the film underperformed financially. Blonde Venus became one of the last great provocations of the pre-code era, a film that dared to suggest a woman's worth wasn't determined by conventional morality, a message too dangerous for 1932 America to handle. 8. The Cheat, 1931. Cecil B. DeMille's remake of his own 1915 silent film didn't just update the story, it unleashed a firestorm about race, power, and women's autonomy that caused theater walkouts across America. Tallulah Bankhead stars as Elsa, a socialite who borrows money from a wealthy, exotic businessman played by Irving Peele, only to face horrifying consequences when she can't repay. What shocked 1931 audiences wasn't just the storyline, but the infamous branding scene, where the businessman attempts to mark Elsa as his property. Though toned down from the 1915 version, the scene's implications of ownership and physical violation sparked immediate backlash. Religious organizations condemned it as depraved entertainment masquerading as drama. Civic groups in several cities organized theater protests, while women's clubs urged boycotts of Paramount Pictures. The film's exploration of financial and physical power over women was considered too explicit for public consumption. In some southern states, censors demanded extensive edits before allowing screenings, particularly of scenes showing physical contact between the businessman and Elsa. Critics were divided, with some praising Bankhead's fearless performance, while others condemned the film's sensationalism. The film performed poorly at the box office, damaged by both the controversy and the economic realities of the Depression. The Cheat represents a fascinating moment when DeMille's trademark spectacle collided with cultural anxieties about race, gender, and power, creating a scandal that helped set the stage for stricter industry censorship. 9. Congo, 1932. MGM's Congo didn't just push the envelope, it shredded it, delivering perhaps the most depraved pre-code film ever released by a major studio. Walter Houston stars as Flint, a paralyzed madman seeking revenge in the African jungle through torture, degradation, and psychological warfare. The studio expected controversy, but not the nationwide revulsion that followed. The plot involves Flint bringing the daughter of his enemy to his jungle compound, forcing her into addiction and prostitution as part of his revenge scheme. What made Congo truly shocking wasn't just its premise, but its relentless, almost documentary-like depiction of human cruelty. Scenes of torture, drug use, and implied assault left 1932 audiences speechless. Religious groups didn't just condemn Congo, they launched nationwide campaigns against MGM itself. The National Council of Churches issued a formal statement calling it a stain on American culture. Theater chains in conservative regions refused to book it, while those that did faced organized protests and boycotts. In Chicago, the film was pulled after just 3 days following public outrage. Critics were equally appalled, with Variety calling it repulsive and questioning how it had passed censors at all. The film performed poorly, with audiences staying away in droves. MGM, embarrassed by the backlash, quickly pulled Congo from circulation and rarely acknowledged its existence afterward. Congo remains the darkest extremity of pre-code cinema, a film so disturbing that even in an era of loose standards, it crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Its legacy isn't just controversy, but the role it played in convincing studio heads that self-regulation wasn't enough. 10. The Last Flight, 1931. Hollywood had made plenty of war films, but none captured the lost generation's disillusionment like The Last Flight. Director William Dieterle's unflinching portrayal of traumatized WWI veterans drinking themselves to oblivion in Paris nightclubs wasn't just controversial, it was a direct challenge to America's patriotic myths that triggered boycotts from veterans organizations nationwide. The film follows 4 damaged ex-pilots and the woman who joins their alcoholic odyssey through post-war Europe. What made it truly revolutionary was its refusal to glorify war or offer healing narratives. These men are permanently broken, seeking escape through endless cocktails and meaningless thrills. Their nihilism and drinking were portrayed with documentary-like realism that shocked 1931 audiences. The American Legion condemned the film as an insult to veterans, organizing theater pickets in several cities. Conservative newspapers accused Warner Brothers of un-American defeatism, while some theaters in military communities refused to screen it at all. Church groups joined the boycotts, concerned about the film's casual depiction of alcoholism and implied romantic entanglements. Yet critics recognized its brilliance. The New York Times called it brutally honest, while Variety praised its unforgettable portrait of a generation. Despite the controversy, the film found audiences in urban areas, though it underperformed financially in regions with strong military connections. The Last Flight represents a brief window when Hollywood dared to question war's glorification, showing its psychological toll without patriotic sugarcoating, a window that would slam shut when the production code took full effect. 11. Safe in Hell, 1931. William Wellman didn't make safe films, but Safe in Hell went beyond provocative into territory so dark and hopeless that Warner Brothers faced boycotts from women's organizations across America. Dorothy McCall stars as Gilda, a prostitute who flees to a Caribbean island after killing a man in self-defense, only to find herself in an even more dangerous trap. The film's unflinching portrayal of a woman fighting against systematic exploitation was unprecedented. What truly shocked 1931 audiences was the island setting, a lawless hell where Gilda is the only woman among criminals, all with predatory intentions. The implied threats of assault were clear even with the limited dialogue of early talkies. Religious groups condemned the film as glorifying fallen women, while women's clubs organized theater boycotts in several cities. What particularly enraged moral guardians wasn't just the subject matter, but the film's bleak worldview. In Wellman's vision, there is no redemption or escape for women like Gilda, only momentary resistance against overwhelming male power. Critics were divided, with some praising its raw honesty, while others condemned its pessimistic brutality. Warner Brothers, surprised by the backlash, pulled the film from some regions entirely. In areas where it did play, theaters faced organized protests and declining attendance after opening weekend. Safe in Hell represents the darkest strain of pre-code cinema, a film that dared to suggest there was no justice for women in a man's world, a message so disturbing that it helped convince studio heads that self-regulation wasn't enough to appease America's moral guardians. 12. Rain, 1932. When United Artists brought Somerset Maugham's controversial play, Rain, to the screen with Joan Crawford as Sadie Thompson, they knew they were courting trouble, but they couldn't have predicted the nationwide religious boycotts that followed. The story of a fallen woman and the missionary determined to save her soul challenged America's religious establishment so directly that entire denominations organized against it. The plot follows Sadie, a prostitute stranded on a South Sea island with a group of travelers, including the fanatical Reverend Davidson, who becomes obsessed with saving her. What shocked 1932 audiences wasn't just Sadie's profession, but the film's portrayal of religious hypocrisy, culminating in the Reverend's spiritual crisis and tragic end. The Methodist Episcopal Church issued formal condemnations urging members to boycott theaters showing the film. Catholic and Baptist leaders joined the campaign, calling it an attack on Christian values. In some communities, ministers led protests outside theaters, while religious newspapers ran editorial campaigns against United Artists. Crawford herself faced personal backlash, receiving hate mail from religious groups and finding herself unwelcome at certain charity events. The controversy damaged the film commercially, particularly in the South and Midwest, where religious organizations held significant cultural power. What's fascinating is that Rain wasn't explicitly anti-religious. It was anti-hypocrisy, a distinction lost on many of its critics. Today, it's considered one of the great pre-code dramas, but in 1932, it demonstrated how dangerous it could be to question America's religious establishment on film. 13. Girls About Town, 1931. George Cukor's sparkling comedy about gold diggers in Manhattan might seem tame by today's standards, but in 1931, its matter-of-fact portrayal of women using men for financial gain nearly got Paramount blacklisted by women's organizations nationwide. Kay Francis and Lillian Tashman star as party girls hired to entertain wealthy businessmen for a price. What made Girls About Town truly shocking wasn't just its premise, but its refusal to moralize. These women aren't tragic victims or cautionary tales. They're clever entrepreneurs using the system to their advantage. The film portrays their lifestyle with a wink and a cocktail, suggesting that in a world where men have all the power, women's cunning is simply good business. Women's clubs in Boston and Philadelphia organized boycotts, claiming the film degraded American womanhood. Conservative newspapers ran editorials warning that such portrayals would corrupt young women's values. In some Midwestern cities, theaters faced protests from civic organizations concerned about the film's glamorization of immoral behavior. Paramount executives defended the film as sophisticated adult entertainment, but found themselves answering uncomfortable questions at shareholder meetings. What saved Girls About Town commercially was Cukor's light touch and the film's undeniable wit. Urban audiences, particularly women, responded to its subversive humor despite the controversy. The film represents a fascinating moment when female economic agency was considered more shocking than violence or horror, a window into America's anxiety about changing gender roles that would soon be slammed shut by stricter censorship. 14. Possessed, 1931. MGM knew they were taking a risk with Possessed, But they couldn't have predicted the political backlash that followed. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable star in a story about a factory worker who becomes the mistress of a wealthy attorney with political ambitions. What made it truly controversial wasn't just the affair, but its frank portrayal of class, ambition, and women's limited options. The film refuses to condemn its heroine for choosing wealth and passion over respectability. Instead, it presents her decision as reasonable, even admirable, a stark challenge to Depression-era morality. Scenes of Crawford enjoying luxury and physical passion without marriage sent moral guardians into a frenzy. Women's organizations condemned the film as glorifying immoral arrangements. Religious groups organized theater boycotts in conservative regions. What truly escalated the controversy was the political dimension. The suggestion that public figures might lead private lives at odds with their public image struck too close to home for comfort. Some political organizations joined the protests, claiming the film undermined public trust in leadership. MGM found itself defending not just the film but the very idea that such stories deserved to be told at all. In response to mounting pressure, some theater chains in the South and Midwest refused to book it. Critics, however, recognized its quality. The New York Times praised its unflinching adult perspective, while Variety noted its remarkable chemistry between the leads. Despite the controversy, Possessed performed well financially, particularly in urban markets less constrained by traditional morality. The film stands as one of the last great explorations of class and gender before the production code enforced more conventional storytelling, a reminder of how boldly Hollywood once examined America's contradictions. What these 14 cinematic bombshells reveal isn't just Hollywood's wild past, they expose how deeply film can threaten established power. These weren't just movies that entertained, they were cultural weapons that forced America to confront its hypocrisies about gender, class, and morality. Which of these forbidden classics would you dare to watch first? Drop your answer in the comments and ask yourself, if films this honest were considered too dangerous for audiences then, what truths might be too uncomfortable for screens today?